Today on the Bandrew Says podcast, all we're going to be doing is answering a bunch of your questions from a hotel room. Greetings, Earthlings. Welcome back to episode 140 of the BSP. My name is Bandrew. This is what I says. Like always, there will be timestamps down below so you can skip around to whatever topic you want to hear me discuss. But if you got the time, I'd suggest listening to the entire episode. Like I say every single week, if you are watching the video version and want the audio version, or if you are listening to the audio version and want the video version, you can find the opposite version at bandrewsays.com. And without further ado, let's jump into the questions. First question comes from AX Black Death XA. Could you please cover some methods/sites/services to use for advertising or marketing a podcast or RSS feed? Thanks. Okay, Black Death. Now, I am sure that there are some websites out there that allow you to submit your podcast or your RSS feed for promotion, but I would advise you against doing that because I think it would be a complete waste of your time and that could be spent elsewhere a lot more successfully. The reason that I'm saying that is, when is the last time that you've gone to a promotion website and said, oh, just because this is being promoted, I'm going to go ahead and listen to this, I'll listen to this, and I'll listen to this. That's probably never happened. So I think you could spend your time more wisely. Now, a way that I think you could successfully promote your podcast is by becoming a valuable member of online communities. For instance, with the Podcastage Discord server, there are people that come in, jump to the promotions and links channel, and drop their link to whatever their project is and never come back, never say anything, never contribute. But then there are others who join the Discord community, interact quite frequently, offer value, communicate with others, offer advice, offer help. And then when those people drop links to their projects, I am much more likely and actually really excited to hear what they're doing or watch what they're doing. I think that's the best way to go about it. Another way you could approach the community aspect is join whatever communities there are out there that surround your niche. So if you're focusing on underwater basket weaving, join the Facebook group, the Google Plus group for the next year, the Discord communities for underwater basket weaving, communicate with people, offer value, offer assistance. And then when somebody says, wow, you are so knowledgeable about this, how do you know so much? You can chime in and say, well, it's because I run a podcast on this. Here's a link. Check it out if you want. I think that's the best way to go about promoting your podcast, but I do fully understand how difficult it is to grow your podcast. Another really important aspect to that is understanding who your target audience is and understand what they would be searching in their podcatchers or on YouTube to find the content that you're creating. For instance, with the Bandrew Says podcast, that's a terrible name because nobody's going to be searching that unless they know who I am. Better Podcasting, on the other hand, knows exactly who their audience is, and they're targeting them with that name. Hobby podcasters who want to start podcasting are going to go into their Apple Podcasts app or Overcast and type, how do I podcast? And they have an episode that will walk them through that. That will be one of the search results. Same thing goes for Podcasters Roundtable and Podcast School, whatever the heck that's called. It's really about having a good name that's very searchable. But going back to your question, as far as websites or methods that would allow you to promote your RSS feed and podcast, I don't think there's any good solution there. It's really about showing potential listeners what value you can offer before you even direct them to your podcast. But very good question, and I hope that helped. Best of luck to you. Next question comes from Anthony Taormina. He says, can you please explain the basics of hosting? I feel like when looking at Libsyn, Podbean, etc., it's like this confidential thing when it comes to the amount of space/costs per month. Let's get real for a second. People, especially new podcasters, are more interested in how long they can expect a weekly podcast to be, and I wish there was like a diagram explaining roughly how much space at different rates and lengths to better understand what plan you need for each host. Anthony, that is a very good question, and I went ahead and headed over to Libsyn.com and I pulled their rate sheet because they do have that available, and the rates that they have are $5 for 50 megabytes, $15 for 250 megabytes, $20 for 400 megabytes, etc. Now, the reason that these podcast hosting services don't say for $5 you can get 200 minutes of podcasting is because podcasters encode their MP3s at different bit rates. For instance, you could encode a podcast at 64 kilobits per second mono, and that will be a relatively small file size. Or you can encode your podcast at 320 kilobit stereo, and that will be a rather large file size. So they would have a lot of variance in the hosting space required for each of these individual podcasts, and I think it's a lot simpler for them to say, we'll give you X megabytes for this price. Now, to give you a general rule of thumb in terms of minutes to megabytes, if you were to encode your MP3 at 128 kilobits per second, you would be getting about 1 minute per megabyte. So if you were to go with their $15 plan, you would be getting 250 megabytes to host your audio with. That translates to around 4 hours and 10 minutes of audio that you could upload. Now, for a beginner podcaster, I think that's going to be plenty of time to upload. I don't think you're going to want to start doing more than one episode per week, and you probably won't want to go over 1 hour. So I think starting somewhere there would be really good, but that is a good rule of thumb. 1 megabyte equals 1 minute of audio if you encode your MP3 at 120 kilobits per second. Now, as far as the bandwidth, because that used to be a big issue when you used to self-host your video or any kind of media on your own server or your own domain, my understanding is these podcast hosters have unlimited bandwidth. So if you were to start your podcast and get 1 million downloads, I don't think they would come banging on your door or knocking it down saying, you owe us more money because you're taking up so much of our bandwidth. I think you pay the $20 or the $15 and you could get as many downloads as you want. Now, if you were to start getting those downloads consistently, they may open a dialogue with you saying, hey, listen, you're going to put us out of business if you keep this up. We do get good rates on that bandwidth, but it's really putting a ding in our pocket and it's really hard to host you. So you may have to renegotiate what kind of rates you're paying if you do start to get really, really popular. I hope that helps, but that was a very good question. Next question comes from Calcifer. Hello, Bandrew. My name is Earthling, and I have a question for you. I'm really interested in heavy vocals recording, but I can't find any useful information. For everything I've seen from your videos, it seems that I made a bad purchase by getting the Blue Yeti. But some people tell me that I can still record growls on that microphone, even if it's a condenser one. What can I do to not break it with my satanic gospel? If you don't know what type of vocals I'm talking about, go to the Alex Terrible YouTube channel. That would give you an idea. Thanks for reading. Bye. Now, Calcifer, I do think you're 100% right that you would have been better served if you did pick up a dynamic microphone, but I think you're going to be okay with a condenser. But first, the reason why I think dynamics are better is they essentially have no max SPL, and you can really eat the microphone, and that will help add body to your screams or really beefing up the growls, especially if you're doing something like pig squeals, which were really popular by Job for a Cowboy and Pig Destroyer, I think. Now, as far as the Blue Yeti, I went ahead and looked up the specs for that mic, and the max SPL is 120 decibels. Now, you may be screaming at 120 decibels, and that could start to distort the audio that you're recording. But in order to fix that, just back away from the microphone. And if I am understanding correctly, I could be completely misquoting this, but every time you double your distance between yourself and the microphone, the audio will decrease 100%, 50%, something like that. So if you're overdriving the microphone, just back up a little bit. Of course, that does mean that you will be introducing more of the room tone, which will be an issue if you are not recording in a treated room. But given that's the microphone you have, those are the compromises that you're going to have to make. But I don't think you'll break it. Just back away from the microphone if you start to hear it clipping or distorting or anything like that. And also make sure you set your gain appropriately so you're not actually clipping in the recording. Next question comes from Subro. He says, I record in Scarlett Solo in Audacity, but my audio levels are low, so it's very less sounding in YouTube. If I amplify it, boomy sounds occurs. I use generally the Boya lapel microphone or the Scarlett CM. So Subro, I would absolutely love to help you and offer you some advice here, but I don't think that I have enough information to offer you anything that's really useful. For instance, I would need to know what your Windows input settings are, what your interface's input gain is set at, if Audacity has any input settings available, what are those set at, and if you're adjusting the fader on the channel in Audacity's individual channel slider. I would need to know all of that information to know what is causing the issue, because just by saying your audio levels are low, these are the microphones I'm using, I don't know where the issue would arise from. Then as far as the Boomy sound statement, I don't know what that means either. Does it mean you're putting plosives into your microphone? Does it mean you're clipping? Does it mean that you're banging on your desk? What does that actually mean? I don't know. But if you are watching this podcast, go ahead and leave that information in the comment section down below. And if you want me to, I'll go ahead and offer you some advice next week. But without that information, I can't really offer you anything useful. Next question comes from Maruska Estudios. What preamp do you recommend to make an MXL R40 ribbon microphone perform at its best? Maruska, I actually went ahead and tried to look up the specs for the R40, and it was tremendously hard to find, but I did find a posting in Gearslut's forum, and they say that the specs for the R40 are the exact same as the R144. Now, I was able to find the specs for the R144, and that means that the R40 has a sensitivity of around negative 56 decibels, which, if I am remembering correctly, is the exact same as the SM58. What that means is you're going to have to drive whatever preamp you have pretty dang hard. So you're not really going to be able to skimp in the preamp or the interface department. What I would recommend is starting with something like the Focusrite 2i2 2nd Gen, which I think has a max gain of around 55 decibels. You will be around 99 or 100%, so you will have quite a bit of background noise and the noise floor will be very prominent. But an even better option would be looking into the Audient ID4, which has around 58 decibels of gain, and it has some of the best sounding preamps, as well as some of the quietest preamps, especially at that price point, which I believe is around $200. That's the route I would personally go if I was on a somewhat tight budget and was really looking to get the best out of my ribbon microphone. Another option you could go with is go with something cheaper like the Bandrew line of interfaces, which, if I remember correctly, I keep saying that, but I think they have around 60 decibels of gain. They do have some noisier preamps though. A workaround there would be to pick up a mic activator like the Cloudlifter CL1 or the Fethead or the Mic Boost or any of those, but that adds maybe $80, $90, or up to $200 to the cost of your interface, and at that point, you're at the same price point as the Audient ID4, which I would ultimately think is a better option. So there you have it, the Focusrite 2i2 2nd Gen, if you are able to swing 150, but if you have $200, I would 100% recommend the Audient ID4. I think that will give you the best performance of that microphone in that price point. And I will go ahead and throw some affiliate links down below if you want to check that out. But very good question. The next question comes from Pippo Magi. How to balance interface gain versus computer microphone volume? Now, I am not 100% sure on this, Pippo Magi, but I don't think that the computer's microphone volume input setting should have any effect on the interface's recording volume. Let me reiterate, I don't think. I could be completely wrong here, though. And right now, I have no way of testing that because I am recording in a hotel room. I don't have a Windows machine, which would have that setting, and I don't have an interface to test that with. So this is me just speculating here because I couldn't find anything online. The way that I would approach this is keep my microphone input volume on the computer set at 100% because I imagine that setting works somewhat like a fader. What I mean there is on a mixer, you have the gain, which is actually affecting how much you're boosting the microphone's preamp. And then you have the fader, which is going to increase or decrease that volume. So you need to ensure at the preamp, the gain setting, which in this case would be on your interface, you're not clipping. And then when you are setting that level, make sure that the fader, or in this case, the microphone input volume, is set at unity, or on Windows, I suppose it would be at 100% because you don't want to have that set at 50%. And if it does affect the volume, think, oh, it's really quiet, I'm going to increase my microphone's input gain on the interface, leading it to clip. Then you have a clipping signal, which is just very quiet. And that's one of the worst situations you could be in. So I would leave it set at 100% and go from there. But I hope that helps. Again, purely speculation here because I can't actually test it. But good question. Next question comes from Zach Man. Can you make a video about a studio recording upgrade path, maybe with logical steps based on use case scenarios? Zach, I don't know if this was your intention, but this is a great way for me to promote a video that I have coming up in the near future where I have a microphone flow chart on how to select the microphone that you need based on your use case and a bunch of other questions. And it's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks, hopefully. And I appreciate you asking that question. But until then, hold your horses, man, because that's going to be helpful, I hope. Next question comes from Luke Capone. Good podcast setup for iPhone or iPad. Luke, I'm going to go ahead and make a recommendation based on what I am actually using to record this podcast right now. I am currently using the iRig Pre-HD. Now, I'm recording it to my MacBook, but this interface does come with a lightning cable, so you could connect it to your iOS device, your iPhone or your iPad. And the reason that I'm recommending that is because it's an XLR interface, meaning you can use whatever microphone you want with that interface. For instance, right now, I am recording using the Beyerdynamic 201TG, and in my opinion, this microphone is 100 times better sounding than any of those iOS microphones out there, which are typically condenser microphones. There are a few iRig microphones that are dynamic, but when I tested them, I wasn't that impressed. So I think this would be your best option because it gives you the versatility to use the interface with your computer or your iOS device. It's also very compact, and you can pick whatever microphone you want depending on where you're recording or what your preference is that day. So I hope that helps. And again, I will go ahead and throw some affiliate links down below because, hey, why wouldn't I? Next question comes from Chris Powell. I have a question I have never seen addressed. Can you use a Cloudlifter or a radial mic boost on a wireless handheld microphone system? If so, what's the best way to set it up? If the microphone system, Sennheiser EWD1 digital wireless handheld, for example, has auto gain control, does that matter? Would you need to use it in conjunction with a vocal effects box or something that has phantom power built into it? Thank you. First off, I'm going to start by saying I have almost zero knowledge when it comes to wireless microphone systems because I have not had any use for them and they are very expensive, so I haven't gone down the road of testing them out because I simply can't afford it. I will start by answering the last question you had. Regardless of what you're using, if you are trying to use one of these microphone activators, you absolutely have to have phantom power. Otherwise, they won't work. That's the way they function. You use the phantom power and it powers the circuitry inside of these microphone activators and it passes 0 volts through to the actual microphone. But back to your question, if you are running your wireless receiver into an XLR port of a mixer or an interface, and you are having to drive the gain up to 60 decibels or 55 decibels, then yeah, maybe you would benefit from this, but I don't think that's necessarily how they're working. I am guessing that the wireless receiver is outputting a line level input. And at that point, if you have a line level signal, I doubt you'd be running that into an XLR port because you'd be running it through another preamp, which you don't want to do. So you'd probably be running that using a 1/4 inch cable into a line level input. That's my take on it. I don't know if I'm right. Again, not too knowledgeable on it, never really used them, but I hope that helps. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in the comments down below. I'm sure Alan from SoundSpeeds has a little bit more knowledge on that topic. And Chris, check the comments because he may be chiming in down below. And that is actually going to take us to the end of this podcast. I know it was different, and we will be back to the regularly scheduled topic, the regularly scheduled format next week. If you liked it, go ahead and share it with a friend. If you got any questions, send them to askbandrew@gmail.com. If you're watching the video, I don't know why I'm pointing over my shoulder to my bed, but that's what's happening. Thank you to everybody who sent in questions. Again, bandrewsays.com for all the different versions of the podcast, bandrewscott.com if you want to see my other projects, and I will see you all next week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye. That was the podcasted outro. What am I doing? Bye.
This has been a Geeks Rising production, your executive producer of Bandrew Scott. For more information, head over to www.geeksrising.com.